No.
That chopped up there at the end. I didn't hear what you said. It sounds like you said you both had reactions.
Yeah, I think we both had reactions to the antibodies. So I think we both got the antibodies. What about you? You haven't been vaccinated yet, have you?
Nothing. Yeah, we just decided yesterday that we're going to do it. I think with everybody now getting it, we're starting to realize that people are like, "Oh, I'm free. I don't care. You know, I'm ready to go out in the world." But you can still be contagious. So we're going to start interacting with people, thinking that everything's fine. And you know how people get when they feel free. You know, they just start getting mindless. So you know, I think it makes sense to get it. And you know, it's not something that I want to have to deal with, especially in my situation right now because of running the business. If I'm out of the business right now, we're in trouble. You know, I can't be out, you know, I can't quarantine for 2 weeks or something along those lines. I don't have enough clients in that type of situation. So, you know, I have to be present. So I've been being like ultra conservative. It's funny. I was telling somebody this weekend, this is easily the most conservative I've ever been in my entire life on like so many different levels. You know, I'm a risk taker on a lot of levels, and I like to look for opportunities, and it's just been having to sit still. And like you said, in that middle, you know, the flat part of the curve, that's where I've been sitting and hovering in limbo, you know, looking for ways to get out of it. But you know, being a physical therapist and having a practice like I do, you need the community to be in some like a, you know, normalcy to make it work. And, you know, and then because it was new, I don't have any doctor relationships established or anything like that. And then, you know, initially they weren't even letting people, you know, go to every doctor's office had a sign on it saying, "Hey, if you're not a patient, don't come in, you know, don't solicit us," type of thing. So yeah, but yeah, we're going to get it done here. Pretty quick.
So tell me about the Wobbler 3. Tell me about the Wobbler 360 and what you're doing with it.
So I'm going to pull. I have a little PowerPoint presentation thing that I'm going to pull up here perfect. So you can see it. Yeah, little basic scenario here. So can you see this here?
Yeah. Yep. I can see it.
So basically, and I know I've talked to you on the phone about this a little bit before, but you know, there was this system that Troy Polamalu had done. That's one of the reasons why I had gotten interested in it. And Marv Marinovich is here on the top left, you know, who was basically one of the first strength and conditioning coaches in the NFL for the Oakland Raiders or the LA Raiders, wherever the team was at the time. I can't remember. He's a USC guy. Todd Marinovich's dad, right from the whole Marinovich, you know, 30 for 30 on ESPN. And, you know, back in the 70s, he had started incorporating, you know, powerlifting and plyometrics and core training and all of this stuff like way before everybody had. And then this guy on the top right, his name's Mike Maddox, and that's a picture of him with us when he delivered the equipment to us the first time that we had bought something from him. And what I'm leaning on right there, that's a picture of me and my best angle for you. They're right there, facing backwards.
Yeah.
And my cousin, yeah, and my cousin on the right who played linebacker at Penn State for 4 years. 4-year letterman. And at that time, it was awesome to have him around because he had been through combine training and all this other stuff. So to have him, you know, bouncing ideas off of what he had seen versus what we were doing at the time was awesome. But you can see Mike's a really big guy, right? He's 6'6", right? Probably, you know, 220, 230. And he was an Olympic level decathlete. And that's why this picture of Bruce Jenner is down here on the right. So Bruce Jenner and Mike went to college at a small university called Graceland University in Iowa. And they were an NAIA school. And Mike was actually a national champion in the decathlete. And he was roommates with Bruce. Mike got injured and then Bruce ended up coming along and breaking all of his records and becoming, you know, Bruce Jenner basically. So they had a group of guys that when they were in college, and I don't know where this was called, the company was called Mini Gym. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. They were an old isokinetics company. They had like one of those lawnmower type of isokinetic machines on a flywheel. And then, you know, they've had other products that came out since. So Mike and this other guy, Barney Fuller, had went to work for this company right out of college. And Barney Fuller is the guy that actually made the Super Cat. So the Super Cat's that plyometric jumping machine here that's down at the bottom, this red machine.
Yeah.
And then Mike had went off and made this isokinetic jumper machine from what they had learned working at this mini gym company and doing sales and everything. They ended up getting these machines involved with Marv Marinovich in the 80s. And then that was where this kind of idea of the sports lab started forming. So Mike Maddox and this Barney Fuller guy were basically the guys that were kind of behind most of the exercise equipment that was being created for this Marinovich sports lab system that they were using with Polamalu and BJ Penn and all these guys. And then there was another lady who was, I don't have her picture here or anything. She was a chiropractor and she was more on the rehab side. So she had created kind of like an injury prevention, training stability and small stabilizer muscles and myofascial PNF patterns and those types of things. And so it was a pretty comprehensive program. So the main reason I got into it, which I'll skip to the next slide here, is because if you remember, I was so like the study that we got published with you guys, I was just really into the foot and ankle because I have foot and ankle problems, and I still do. So I was looking for a solution to still solve that problem of how do we address the foot and ankle in this total, kinematic change situation, right? And ultimately, for working on functional movement and functional biomechanics. And so, that was very attractive to me. I got into it. And then, it also, like I said, it had this myofascial component to it. And, you can see here, in the picture to the right is, a basic picture of this guy working on some movement patterns. He's actually that's Eric Harris from the Las Vegas Raiders now, which is, so, funny to say, at this point. And, he was training with us back then. And, ultimately trying to find a way, especially for myself. Obviously, this kind of started out a little selfish where I didn't want to have to get surgery, and I still wanted to be able to work on all my movement patterns and keep my myofascial system working the way that it could at the best. I didn't want to start having long-term negative damage. But I started realizing that I couldn't get past a certain point because I just have too much instability in the ankle. So another part of this program is there's a big aquatic therapy component to it. And I've always been interested in aquatics. We had it at the University of Cincinnati. It's funny. I've had it, some level of aquatic therapy at every site that I worked at, almost maybe, 90% of the years that I've been a physical therapist, right? So I had this really good understanding about being able to do a lot of volume and repetition under a low level of resistance, especially something that's like quasi-isokinetic, like water can be. And so the wobbler was something that was basically able to do that. It was something that you were able to do low impact, still work on all your mechanics and, really keep everything functional, but not overtrain it to the point where I would start having Achilles problems or plantar fasciitis or anything like that. So then, let's see here. Well, yeah. So then I started, working with it with my athletes, and they started liking it. And then there was kind of two things that happened. I had taken it to, I was coming home from work to do like a lunch break one day, and my son had been born at this time, and my mother was watching my son. And so basically I walk in for lunch, and my mom's sitting in the front of the television watching her soap opera doing the wobbler, and I'm like, whoa, what are you doing? Why are you doing this, right? Mom, she's like, oh, I love this thing. It works my core, my hips, and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, oh, aha moment. This isn't just for athletes, right? But then it was literally within the same 2-week time period, I came back into the office, and I don't know what I had. I can never remember this. I don't know what I had going on, but I was working with Shamarko Thomas of the Pittsburgh Steelers. He was a safety for them. And I had something else I had to do. And I said, hey, Shamarko, go hop on the wobbler for 10 minutes. He'd already kind of learned how to do it. But we, at that time, we were basically using it for balance exercises, right? And I said, hey, just go over there and play around on it for 10 minutes, right? I come back over and he's pouring sweat, right? And I'm like, oh, wait a second. Maybe this is a little bit more of a conditioning tool. I checked his heart rate. His heart rate was around 130 or 140. So he was really getting his heart rate up. And I was like, oh, okay, this is interesting. At that time, this Mike Maddox, the guy that was the equipment inventor, I had bought about 10 pieces of different equipment from him that were, like I said, that other machine. There was another machine it's called a crawler. So all the machines were designed to work on these functional patterns. So the wobbler was kind of getting buried in all of these pieces of equipment because they were all kind of complicated and new, and they just needed, you know, there was a learning curve on trying to how to figure them out. So then, you know, as these couple of things happen, I'm like, oh, we need to focus our attention there. So I'm going to go to the next slide here. So you were just talking about this, looking at rate of force development, right? So you have your kind of your pure power when you're looking at a vertical jump or, you know, a squat or something along those lines, where it's just about, you know, pure torque and force development, right? But then in sports, you know, it's really about mechanics, right? So when you look at the 1-inch punch, the 1-inch punch is like probably your quintessential expression of rate of force production, right? Being able to create that force in the short range of motion in the fastest amount of, you know, time possible. But then on the other end of the spectrum, you have limping, right? So limping ends up being your breakdown, right? You're having this disconnect where now in the 1-inch punch, you're using your whole body, all 4 limbs are, you know, working in unison to create this power where now you have limping, right? I know, you know, that I know that you know this stuff, right? But when you're looking at this as a clinician and trying to resurrect somebody's limping pattern back to a normal gait, like what you're talking about right now, one of our big challenges is that, number one, you want to disconnect, right? So that limb almost wants to get, you know, left behind, like you're dragging that leg behind, and it's not working in this, you know, all 4 limbs unison, which I made this word up. I call it ambikinetic. So I don't know what you think about that. I've been making a lot of words up over the years. Maybe there is a better word for it, but the ability to use both sides of your body and all 4 limbs at once in unison, that's what you see with these elite level athletes, right? Even on a regular vertical jump, the ability to use the arms and use the legs all in unison and keep the trunk in the correct position. And this also goes back to the ACL research, right? When we watch this limping pattern, we see that same disassociation between the trunk and the lower body, right? So when you see the same thing on the ACL research, it's arguably a similar progression on the same spectrum of the pathomechanics. You're just not seeing it as far as you would with somebody that's in a situation like you that just had an acute injury, but it's the same deviation in the trunk. So in that 1-inch punch, you have to get your weight over top of the foot. You have to be loaded and coiled a little bit into this position where, boom, you're going to be able to express that power, which in gait is basically the same thing that's happening, right? So then the opposite happens when you have the injury. So then I came across this video a while back, and I have to reshare this with you. I'll have to stop this share and then come back here and reshare, yeah. About this thing called the spinal engine, right? And have you ever see this before?
I don't think I have.
Yeah, so it's looking at this guy that obviously, you know, is you know, all 4 limbs are amputated, and looking at how he's using his trunk to weight shift and rotate while he's moving and walking with no arms and no legs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. And this is the argument that, you know, with like elite sprinters and elite level athletes, that they have this, you know, counter rotation and side bending thing that's going on during all of their mechanics. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it was interesting. We were talking about this a couple of weeks ago when I did a little webinar on this before. You know, if you lengthen the limbs on this, right, it changes all the lever arms. So it makes it easier to have more, you know, deviations in you know, a pathomechanical direction because you're lengthening the lever arm, right? So which makes this, I'll play that one more time for you so you can see it.
Mm-hmm.
Right, so this is kind of almost more of an exaggerated form because the lever arms are so short when you think of it that way. Right, but you can see how he weight bears on his ischial tuberosity to create a base of support. Then he shifts his weight over top of it a little bit, and he's counter rotating through his pelvis and his shoulders. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So now, you know, within your situation, what's happening, right? You're not wanting to load onto that leg, so you can't counter rotate off of it, which is the challenge that we see when we're working with somebody that has an injury. But we also see it that people have deficits in that area. Are you still there, Tim?
I'm here. Yep.
Oh, there you go. Yep. So this is just another picture of that. And people still have deficits in those areas when we really do a deeper assessment, right? When we look at them like we did with walking across force plates and all of those things, we see that people have typically a dominant side pattern, right? Is it because they had an injury, or is it because they're right-handed or left-handed or whatever? You know, you can look at that data and try to extrapolate that out. But we know that, you know, and I always come back to this. It's like, well, what supplements should somebody take to get stronger? And it's like, well, hold on, let's see. Maybe they have one leg that's 50% weaker than the other. You don't even know, right? So let's go there first so we can make them more mechanically efficient. Like, you know, what we see here with Chris Johnson. And this is just coming back to this movement pattern scenario where we're getting this side bending and weight shifting over top of the foot to get into this power position, right? So as we go to load, we can absorb the impact in that position, right? Just the whole thing, same thing with the trunk shifting and type of stuff that we're talking about with the ACL mechanics, right? On the one side, we have that valgus positioning with the trunk being in the wrong position. Typically, the arms and head are in the wrong position versus this, where we're head over foot. We got this real solid power position. You got a little bit of varus at the knee, right? And this is, you know, one of the elite runners in the NFL type of thing, right? So then, you know, back to the same thing, this idea with the weight shifting and trunk rotation pattern and limping being, you know, with this Trendelenburg thing, it's the, you know, the exaggeration again, right? And then this other study here, I think it's, I don't know, you probably know how to say the name better than I do, Chowdhury. I'm sure you're familiar with this study, right? Looking at, you know, changing the, right? So, which obviously the upper body and the lower body are connected, which I know that's a big part of the ACL research. I don't need to beat this stuff, you know, down for you too much. But again, this comes back to this idea of integrating in, using all four limbs of the body, right? Having, you know, being able to tease out this weakness in the dominant side issue, right? Being able to train the power position and the force absorption position, right? Without overloading it to the point where we're going to start causing connective tissue breakdown, especially if we have somebody that's recovering from an ACL injury or an ankle sprain or something along those lines. We want to use that kind of hydrotherapy idea of that repetition on volume under a low load, which we also see that when we start working on speed. Right, the higher that the resistance becomes, or the higher the load becomes, the poorer the sequencing becomes, the more awkward it becomes, and the less mechanically efficient it becomes, and also the more at risk for overloading the connective tissue and injury that you have as well. So we want to make sure that we're able to work on high-speed movements in a functional sequence. Right, and this is especially when it comes down to rotation and weight shifting, which is what we're seeing a lot of the times with like these medicine ball throws and all of these things. The movement is coming from the outside in instead of the inside out, right? Just like a golf swing, for example, right? The rotation comes from the inside out, not the outside in. So if we increase the load on the golf club by 50%, you wouldn't be able to swing it correctly. Right. Same thing with, you know, using weighted balls for throwing. You can't throw a shot put like a baseball. That's why you hold it here so you can use your trunk to, you know, to swing your limbs basically. Right. Which is what's designed to happen here. So, and then again, so you know, this, I think this is the close to the last slide. Yeah. So basically the wobbler was really designed to take that crawling pattern where you're looking at that ipsilateral movement in the weight shifting and the rotation and doing it in the upright position. I'm sure you're familiar with that idea, everybody. So that way, if you crawl a lot, you're supposed to automatically be a better runner or a better walker or whatever you say, you know, that kind of old school theory, which I still think that there's some merit to that. I don't know, you probably would have some better research background in that than I would. But again, like I said, you know, it's designed to work on these symmetrical loading patterns in this ipsilateral counter rotation movement that we see in this natural cross body patterning, but it's also a soft surface. Like you were able to open it and check your wobbler out, right?
Yes.
Right. So, and then probably more importantly, the last thing here, the third bullet point to the bottom here is that it's proactive dynamic postural stabilization, right? Versus reactive, you know, static stabilization, right? So where we need to see that movement in space to really see the functional transfer, right? Most people that lose their balance, they don't lose it when they're standing still, it's when they're moving, right? And that's also the same thing with the injuries, unless it's a contact injury where somebody comes and hits them when they're standing still or something along those lines. So we want to be able to do something that gives the person the feedback that to show that they're not weight shifting correctly or they're not rotating correctly, that they have an asymmetry in this pattern, and then also allow them to self-correct, right? Which is basically what the whole system is about. It's about, okay, can we give the right feedback tool here to allow somebody to self-correct their mechanics and basically, you know, end up training some of this on their own without such a high intensity level on either the clinician being there and holding everything and being like, hold on, don't move this, don't touch this, Q, 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 right? Which we know eventually you got to get rid of those Qs, right? So then also on the other side, which, you know, it's funny because of all the experience that I had with you, it really left me with, and I think I had talked to you guys when I was exiting out of there, like, well, what do you do when you don't have all these bells and whistles, right? What do you do when you don't have 3D motion analysis, right? What do you do when you don't have, right? Yeah. What do you do when you don't have all these gait training devices and all of this stuff? And, you know, to elaborate on that, I was having a hard time with NovaCare at the University of Cincinnati, not doing biodex testing and isokinetic testing at all of the other locations. It's like, well, if there's all these other ACL patients in Dayton and all these other places, why aren't we bringing them down to the university and doing this testing? Well, if we're not, then what the heck are the clinicians doing to return athletes to sports without any objective data, right? So I guess this system and these products that this guy was creating was kind of like the best of both worlds. It was like, okay, well, it doesn't have a lot of crazy technology, but it also doesn't require a lot of manual, you know, input from the therapist, right? You don't have to hold people in place and guard and all of those things. And then it also allows them to self-correct, which arguably helps people faster. Now, I don't have any research on this, but I've been using it, you know, using this stuff for, you know, 6-7 years now, and it's only helped me. And that was the, you know, that was the whole idea, you know, and this is, I think, the reason why people don't know about this system is because, you know, basically these guys kind of came at everybody in the 80s and 90s like, we have the answer and you guys are stupid. You don't know what you're talking about. And all this stuff that you're doing is hurting athletes and you need to listen to us. And everybody was like, yeah, right, dude, shut up, you know? So, you know, they were able to bring in, I think, some of the innovators and the outliers of the profession at the time, but it really never grew. I also think, you know, them not being a physical therapist or, you know, being real biomechanics people, they didn't have the language to kind of explain what was going on with this stuff. So when I started working with them, I had the language and I was like, oh, this makes sense. This is biofeedback. This is, you know, these are these things that, you know, this equipment does. It has its place, but you don't want to argue against the other things that people are doing. This should be something that we use to help, right? Hey, I have this thing that can help you do, you know, better with whatever you're trying to do. Not, hey, you're stupid and you don't know what you're talking about. That usually, you know, from my young experience, still, I don't think that works very well with people, right?
It does.
So, and then the next thing was, you know, basically planning on showing you how to use it correctly.
Yep.
Right.
Okay.
So, okay. So you can see I have like this little, I've been doing these virtual training things. So I have my little like makeshift gym here. Thankfully, my wife loves me a lot and she hasn't kicked me out yet. Yeah.
That's good.
Right? Yeah,
Yep.
Exactly. It's been a struggle, but what are you going to do? You got to make it work, right? So yeah, we were actually doing these like boot camp classes from here. So can you see okay there?
I can see you well, perfectly well.
Right. So basically, you know, the first part is it tips side to side, so you can work on your weight shifting. And the first part that happens with most people, and like, have you got a chance to try it yet?
Yeah, I have played with it. Yes.
Okay, and did you watch some of the videos too?
I haven't seen the videos, no.
Okay, so then this will make more sense because most of those videos are just basically showing you exercises and stuff to do on here. So, you know, so again, because it has this shifting component, it's low impact, but I can still get a lot of speed here going. And I'm not saying that you should do that first, but that's kind of the point of it, right? Is that this thing really unloads you, but it also, I can feel when I'm hitting the bottom. Right. So I can feel when I'm hitting the bottom of this thing each time, but it's de-weighting me as I go. Right. But it still allows me to get into, you know, more of a functional pattern. So then the next part is we teach people how to rotate on one leg like this, right? To get that same kind of counter rotation balance that we were talking about with those videos and the pictures that I was just showing you, back and forth here like this on the same side. And then
I got it.
Depending on where somebody is, I wouldn't have you do this initially. We actually take the leg off and start working on a single leg balance rotation. Now, the cool part about this, what's that?
I like that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It's a pure rotation, right? So basically, from what I know, there's nothing else that really moves like this and does what it does. You know, we did a big market analysis on it. You know, this pure ability to rotate, like once you try this, you'll see, I mean, like this is really hard to do, but I do it all the time. And you can start working on it really fast. Now, because my foot isn't fixed, right, I can really work on that rotational pattern and be completely safe and not have to worry about it, right? So, and then the other part of it is that it moves in space, right? So then we put that together and we weight shift and we turn and we tip and we rotate, right? So we're here, boom, 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 and then we're back and forth. And then there's all kinds of stuff you can do. And I've been playing with this, walking around on the edge, tandem here, right? And just doing these little walks, right? And then there's all kinds of stuff that you can do where you get on the ground, right, and basically do Spider-Man push-ups and things like that. But you're getting that pure rotation out of it, right? And then so